The Battlefield 6 beta is over, and the next time we're able to play may not be until the official release in a little less than 2 months' time. So where does that leave us? Is Battlefield back? Or are there some obvious problems headed our way, from cheating to in-game exploits and a totally unproven large-scale map and warfare system? Let's dive in. So right away, I can tell you that since the beta has ended, I absolutely miss playing the game. As I said in my first impressions video, the gameplay is fantastic in just about every way, and it's hitting all the important notes in moment-to-moment combat, and it even pushes it further in many regards. Like, I want to load up a round right now and play with the B-36 and test different build types for it and play the crap out of the Cairo map. A map so good that it provided some of the best Battlefield gameplay I've experienced when measured across the entire franchise. DICE has absolutely proven that under the right conditions, Battlefield 6 can absolutely go toe-to-toe with the best Battlefield gameplay across the entire franchise. That said, this beta has very much been seen through the experience that the maps provide. And if the Cairo map hadn't been part of this beta lineup, I think players might be singing a very different song about the state of Battlefield 6. Liberation Peak I found to be very whelming and a rather weak example of the quote-unquote all-out warfare gameplay. Iberian Offensive, which to be honest actually ended up growing on me once I got the hang of it, is still a rough introductory map with kinda bland visuals and some chaotic gameplay. And Empire State, a map that takes place in New York City for the very first time in a Battlefield game, somehow ended up being my least favorite map of the 4. Again with kinda muted, ugly visuals and chaotic pathing and gameplay. Cairo absolutely did the heavy lifting in my opinion, and luckily it was so good that it made up for the mediocre map offerings from the other 3. Now DICE should have been trying to put their best foot forward here and show off their best maps, and while Cairo could absolutely carry that title of potentially a fan favorite map, the others, I sincerely hope, are not a good example of both their best work and what's to come with the remaining maps. If we look at their past games, alphas, and betas, DICE was usually pretty spot on with showcasing their best map examples. Battlefield 3 had Operation Metro and eventually Caspian Border to showcase both close range and all-out warfare gameplay. Battlefield 4 did Siege of Shanghai, Battlefield 1 had Sinai Desert, and E3 allowed people to play St. Quentin Scar. Battlefield 5 did Narvik and Rotterdam, which I think out of all the maps I've mentioned so far are some of the best that have ever been showcased, despite Battlefield 5's beta being an incredibly buggy mess. And 2042 did Orbital. So in comparison, it seems like Battlefield 6 has really held back the big guns like Operation Firestorm, and it's not exactly clear why. We can obviously speculate that it might be due to vehicle gameplay being in a poor state with a lot of critical feedback already, even from their limited use in the beta maps. Developers are already having to put out fires and say that their plan was to showcase the fast-paced gameplay, etc. with their tiny maps, which seems like a weird plan given the franchise's rich history of all-out warfare gameplay. You know, the thing that makes Battlefield stand out from all the other generic bland FPS games. Now that said, I did a deeper dive into the 5 remaining launch maps, and it does leave me a bit more hopeful about what we're getting on day 1. Firestorm is clearly going to be a heavy hitter. We know the layout of that map, it's well proven, and it's an excellent map for vehicle and infantry gameplay. Unfortunately, Saints Quarter is going to be another small infantry-only map, although the skies are blue and the color seems saturated, so hopefully it'll be a bit prettier than what we have so far. New Sobek City is the map that looks a lot like Gulf of Oman. It has land and air vehicles, and if it plays like Gulf of Oman, it could be absolutely fantastic. Mirak Valley is the largest map in Battlefield 6, and it kind of looks like BF1 or BF5 with a lot of dirt and trenches. It could be really cool, especially if the visuals are allowed to breathe and not muted browns and grays. Manhattan Bridge, the other New York map, is going to feature gameplay including helicopters. We see that in the trailer, and it could be pretty cool if it plays out like some of Battlefield's other maps that featured helicopter and ground vehicle gameplay in urban environments. Those have often led to some really cool gameplay. So 4 out of the 5 maps that we haven't seen yet will have air and ground vehicle gameplay, which means that out of the 9 launch maps, 5 will feature air and ground vehicles, while Iberian Offensive and Cairo will offer only ground vehicles and the other 2 maps will offer infantry only. And overall, that seems like a pretty well balanced spread. It's just curious that we didn't get more of the heavy hitters, big open maps for the beta, and given the difficulty of vehicle balance, I think it's a safe bet that maybe they're held back due to needing more time to work out vehicle gameplay. Now, the Rush game mode got a bit of flack over the second weekend as well. Being a 12v12 infantry-only experience, it didn't really live up to many players' expectations. Rush used to be the large-scale attack and defend mode, but it was ultimately replaced by Breakthrough, which really only changed it from having to arm MCOMs to instead capturing objectives to move forward. And it tended to be a much more balanced experience and catered better to a larger player count, and thus gained more favor and sort of replaced Rush. So with Rush coming back, DICE decided to take a different approach and make it smaller and a little more tactical. And I personally don't mind it, but it did suffer from a bunch of map balance issues, which is a much bigger problem that I've been yelling at DICE about for years at this point. We could call it the codification of Battlefield if you want. A long time ago, DICE used to stick to their guns and focus on their core experience and their core modes, but now they're trying to inject all the modes to all the maps, and it means that many modes are just not going to really play out that well, and more dev time is going to be spread across trying to balance many different modes instead of mastering a few. And I personally hate this. It's been a problem for a long time, not just Battlefield 6, but many of its previous games, and it's 100% influenced by executives feeling like they need to match Call of Duty on paper with the quantity of features, because they don't really know how to measure quality of said features. They're looking at spreadsheets and data. They don't have an easy way to say that one map is better than 2. They're just looking at numbers and quantity of things. I think it's really dumb, and until they can grow a pair and stand by their fewer but more refined modes, we're going to continue to get sloppy throwaway modes, which frankly Rush will likely end up being, along with most of their smaller infantry-focused modes. Domination, Squad Deathmatch, Team Deathmatch, King of the Hill, blah-de-blah-de-blah, it's all kind of derivative COD drivel, and DICE can do better. Fortunately for fans of Battlefield, this approach isn't going to sink Battlefield 6, but frankly it's not going to do them any favors either. Now, since the second beta weekend, it seems like the closed weapon playlists are not gaining much traction. If anything, I think it was a weak experiment, if you could even call it that, putting unrestricted game modes next to restricted game modes, which will always yield people opting for the more open modes simply for the freedom of unlocking weapons easily. It's like the 24/7 infantry-only maps. A huge appeal of them is that it allows you to rank up quickly, unlock items and weapons quickly, as opposed to the gameplay being so fantastic that's all you want to play. Similar effect with open weapons, it allows an easier avenue to unlock and rank up stuff if given the option. The gameplay to me feels much better with closed weapons. Others have mentioned that they don't really notice much of a difference between the two, and at which point I would just suggest that DICE moves forward with a closed system so they don't have to be compared to 2042's class balance. It'll ultimately give them more tools to balance out their classes and make them more interesting. It really seems like a no-brainer to me, but I think as others are now starting to speculate, DICE was always planning to keep the open system, and the closed playlist was just there to quell some of the concern. It'll be unfortunate if that is the case, as I think it's really just going to lead to a less interesting game in the long run. Now let's shift gears and talk about where Battlefield 6 absolutely blew expectations out of the water compared to their track record, and that is the performance. Over both beta weekends, which would be 4 days each for me, I had no crashes, a solid frame rate, no dropping from servers, and even with the overloaded server systems requiring a queue to get into the servers, the ingest process was relatively straightforward and I really didn't have to wait long any time. It was frankly incredibly impressive how robust the experience was, whether you're comparing it to other Battlefield games or just any other game of this size in general. This is a huge change for the studio that's traditionally looked like it was way behind schedule when it released most of its betas, typically having tons of bugs, stability issues, low frame rates, connection issues, maps that clearly hadn't been tested. Most of them have been a giant disaster. Now that said, it also wasn't completely squeaky clean. DLS seemed to stop working on the second weekend, which doesn't concern me too much. It seems like it's probably an easy fix for the team, especially considering that it worked the first weekend. And when it comes to gameplay balance and exploits, there was definitely a fair share of weird stuff going on. From players being able to bunny hop around the map and get up onto rooftops where they shouldn't be, I think DICE has their work cut out for them. I've been through way too many releases to delude myself into thinking that somehow everything is going to be balanced and clean on day one. It's probably going to take months and months of patches after launch before we start to get a better idea of Battlefield 6's final balance. But overall, comparing the biggest critiques and the biggest victories of this beta, I think we're in store for a solid experience. Again, reading through that map lineup of what's scheduled for release, I think we are going to get some better maps. I think they were held back for potentially the wrong reasons, and it's given us a little bit of a skewed perspective over what type of gameplay Battlefield 6 is going to offer on average. I've got my fingers crossed and I don't know, but that's what it feels like having researched those upcoming maps. And I also have to kind of remind myself too that we're only talking about the classic multiplayer stuff here. Obviously, this is the biggest draw of the game for me, but DICE has got a free-to-play Royale experience coming at some point. There's going to be a single player, and there's also this new escalation game mode and other stuff coming to the base multiplayer that could mix things up in new and fun ways. So there's a lot of other things that really haven't been showcased here, and I think release is going to provide a lot of cool stuff to check out. DICE clearly has a big hype train marketing plan for leading up to release. I wouldn't be surprised if we got a tease of the new Royale mode next at some point. There's probably going to be a bunch more trailers and other hype things, so I'll be keeping my eyes peeled to the news. Again, if you guys don't want to miss any sort of big Battlefield news updates, stay tuned to the channel. Drop me a like if you enjoyed this content, subscribe if you want to see more content like this, and if you missed my initial impressions that go much deeper on all of the gameplay nuance, check out this video here. As always guys, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. This is Level Cap signing off.